Okay, so it's really good to see everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for being here. Let's begin with a bow. So if you already are familiar with the practice of the bow, you can just do that. And if you're not, I invite you to just take a moment to pause and feel your heart, feel your good human life. And we sit like a mountain, give like a river, and rising up, shine like the sun. All right, so it's, I'm really excited to be able to dive into this conversation with other people because it's a topic that's been really alive for me in so much of my work in Shambhala, and in particular, you know, in the past year and a half, after all of the allegations and all of the convictions came out, you know, convictions of child abuse, just all of these traumas and documented harm in our community, and sort of how it affected, in particular, the environments in which we are hosting families and children. And so I have a little story, which is kind of the main moment when I was really able to put this question into words, even though it was living inside me before. And so every spring, and this is about to be the fifth one, I've been leading family spring break retreat at Shambhala Mountain Center with Kate Raddock. And we have, you know, 60 people in attendance, and it's been a really magical experience. And a lot of families are repeat attendees, some of them being very long time Shambhala practitioners, and others being, you know, not having any connection to Shambhala other than wanting to connect in heartfelt ways with their family. And so last year, as we prepared for the program, this was right after the news came out that child abuse had occurred at Shambhala Mountain Center many decades ago, but nevertheless, that's when it occurred. And we, as the teachers and staff, made the decision to send out a letter to the parents, letting them know that this had happened, just so they could be fully informed, have any questions, and if they felt uncomfortable, to back out. So we did have one family decide not to come. So then as we, as staff, teachers, and also the SMC staff, we're really concerned about wanting to make sure that what we're offering and what we're creating is safe. We together began to implement some of the child protection policy that a group, the part of the Family and Children's Council, had been working on for several years prior to any of this happening. So this included having the staff sign conduct agreements, getting everyone background checked, you know, a lot of rules needing to be set in place that weren't there before SMC. So things like children under a certain age needing to be accompanied by their parents on the land at all times, which that wasn't necessarily happening before. You know, a lot of times the children would just be all together playing while the parents were in the lodge room and the children were in the halls of the lodge or the common spaces. This also included us implementing the 2 adults policy, which we always tried to do, but in many cases, due to having an age range, you know, from 3 years old to 17 years old, that very often the teachers, you know, one teacher would be outside, one teacher would be in the playroom, one teacher would be leading a circle. And so, and it was very fluid, and that allowed for a lot of magic and space and creativity and really meeting the needs of all the children. And so as we were in this week together, really caring, really heartbroken, and really longing to, you know, hold the magic, hold the teachings, and offer safety and sanity at the same time. So we began to change how we were offering things and how we were showing up. And we did keep two teachers at all times, or, you know, if that was impossible, the door is open and the other teacher, you know, you're in the sight line of another teacher. And this really changed what the children were able to do. So now the ones who wanted to go outside couldn't go outside because a teacher wasn't available. Or, you know, now the sort of natural flow and magic was changing. There was more structure, more boundary. All of a sudden they can't run as a pack together through the halls of the lodge. You know, there needs to be a parent. And the children were really feeling this. And, you know, we spent maybe the first whole day in the adult program actually talking about what are the boundaries? What do we agree on? How do we want to be? And I think for some people, this was also overwhelming. Like, why do we have to spend hours talking about rules? We just are here to practice. And at this one moment, and I was feeling like the pull of that myself, like, oh, I don't want to have to do this. And also, oh my gosh, I want to make sure this is safe. And at this one moment, one of the 12-year-olds came to me and she was in tears. And she said, Leslie, I hate this. And I was like, what do you hate? You know, well, I hate feeling like suddenly we can't just do what feels right to do. Shambhala is the only place where I can ever be myself, and it doesn't feel like that here. And, you know, tears were in my eyes too. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hear you. I totally hear you. This is really hard, you know, and we're trying to figure this out together. Like, how do we hold space? How do we allow for the sacred flow of meeting what is arising while still having boundary and having safety and having rules and regulations and, you know, just making sure that we're protecting everything. And so I was holding this question, and everyone was, the teachers, the staff, the participants, SMC staff. Over that week, I had so many conversations around this, like, what is the dance? And to me, it felt like a continuum, you know, and like, where do we land on this continuum from safety to sacredness, from too tight to too loose? You know, that this is how I was sort of thinking about it, for lack of better terms. And at the same time, you know, I could see both sides. So I could see how fear kind of hijacks our minds. And in fear, and obviously this is our body's wisdom, because, you know, we're longing for protection. If something isn't safe, we're going to go towards what is safe, because that's survival. But just watching how easily and quickly fear of something bad happening can hijack an entire situation. And suddenly we're unwilling to make a move. We're unwilling to even just be in space because we're afraid something bad would happen. So we suddenly have to collapse all of the space and fill it up, you know. And then I'm seeing on the other hand of this, like, how easy we can push back on boundary, thinking that it's somehow bad, that like, it's too tight, it's bad, it's not okay, rather than connecting with the truth of the matter, which is that boundary is a form of compassion, you know. And how do we like hold that as well? And so as I have been contemplating this, I don't have any answers, but it continues to be alive in all of my work. It continues to grow. I continue to see the dance of these two things. And there are just a few more things I wanted to offer here before we open up to the conversation. I think it's important that, you know, we're not trying to solidify the right way. There's no one thing that's going to meet every situation. So I'm not hoping that together we'll somehow be like, oh, this is how we deal with it, and then put that in writing, and then that's it. Because every situation is its own living, breathing experience. And we have to come back to our practice in order to relate with it and meet it exactly where it is. I think it's important for me to use situations like this to take a deeper look into what we're offering, how we connect, and how we hold our minds within it, right? So watching all the places where we feel afraid, or where we're not sure, or where we feel like there's not enough container. Also, for me, it's working with the practice of boundary, understanding that boundary can help us go deeper, and it can actually open up space depending on how we relate to it. If we relate to it as oppressive, but sometimes when we're fully held, we can go deeper. I think the second thing is that coming back to this teaching that everything that arises is an expression of sacredness, so that the whole experience is included, and that we don't have to go through and label bad, good, good, bad, bad, good. That's not sacred. That is sacred. And I feel like I was really sort of doing that when I made my dual continuum. Over here is safety and over here is sacredness. But what if actually they're co-arising? What if boundary is sacred? What if safety is sacred? And so just like, how do we come back to this practice, which very much is contained within our teachings in Shambhala, of non-duality, right? And of everything being included, and you can't sort of just extract and label and solidify. So within that is learning how to hold seemingly irreconcilable things without trying to reconcile them. Can we rest in uncertainty? I don't know. And when you work with kids, adding all of these on top of just what it is to show up with them and relate to them, it gets bigger. Understanding that the mess and chaos are needed. You don't have to push those away. You don't have to constantly strive to be comfortable and have clear answers. And then also leaning into where it's hard. So these are some of the things that I've been holding as it relates to this. And I think what I'm really interested in as I work with children a lot is in the context of everything, I feel like it's really important not to communicate mistrust to children. How do we support them and teach them what's okay and what's not okay without saying, like, the world is full of bad people that are going to hurt you, and therefore you should. I was raised like that. The world is full of, if you do this, you're going to get kidnapped. If you do this, someone's going to attack you. If you do that, you're going to be assaulted. And that was my whole childhood. And so it takes a lot to get from there back to, like, what is actually inherently trustworthy in the human experience. And so how do we communicate inherent trust and inherent sacredness while still protecting, right? And all of this, we want to be better for our children. We want to have better, saner communities. We want to create a community where child abuse isn't happening, where we're not buying into sexism and ageism and racism. And how do we do that? How do we hold that? How do we work with this whole big dance? So that's all that I am going to say about it. And I would, at this point, like to open it up for discussion.
So we are at an interesting size here as a group. Leslie has presented us some amazing things to contemplate and consider. And a quarter of our group, I have no video. So I would need a verbal response versus a visual. But we have the opportunity, we could either break into 2 breakout rooms to have a little bit more opportunity for everyone to discuss, or we could stay here as 12 and less people might be able to offer their voice to the whole group. But just wanting to see an opinion from those in attendance. So if you want to stay as our whole group of 12, you could thumbs up. If you want to do breakout groups to divide, and if you are in the middle. So my 3 non-visuals, if you want to unmute yourself, you could answer. And most of the votes I saw is up. I saw 1 breakout group, 1. So
yeah, I'd also be interested in a breakout group, but I'm fine either way.
okay. So I think for just ease of starting the conversation, we'll stay here together as a group and I'll watch the clock. So in about 12 minutes, if we feel like energy is rising and not enough voices are being shared, we could do a smaller breakout session in the halfway point. So with that, if everyone wants to select their view to be on gallery view, you'll kind of get to see everyone at once versus the person who's actively speaking. And in looking at that view, you can kind of read the room and know when to unmute yourself and offer. So I'll just let people unmute themselves. And if I notice your lips starting moving and you haven't unmuted, I can unmute for you. So, does anyone have something rising to discuss to what Leslie has offered us? Are we frozen? No, Laura moved too. Ah, yes, Gala.
Good morning, everyone. Hello. Nice to see all your faces here. Thank you, Leslie, for all of that, for articulating.
We might have Gala frozen. We'll give her a moment. Gala, if you can hear us and you want to mute your camera, sometimes the audio will come through when the camera is turned off. And I'm not sure. She might be frozen. So if someone else wants to offer, she might rejoin us in a minute. Yes, Leslie. Go. Let me go here. There you are.
Leslie, I thank you for all that. I had a question. The very last thing you said was that we want to create communities where we're not buying into sexism, racism. You said a bunch of things. I don't think you said classism, but you might have. But I would love to hear more about that concept of creating those communities and also about not buying into it. And it was just an interesting choice of words.
So I think what I'm meaning, I've been seeing so much, my own and others' sort of unconscious systemic existence, which perpetuates all of these isms. I didn't say classism, but yes, we can include it. And we sort of accept these things as reality. Like we operate on them because that's how society is set up. So even if outwardly we're not, committing racist acts, we hold those things within us sort of subconsciously and unconsciously. And, I don't know the answers, but I'm really curious in the conversation, like, how do we create communities where those systems can fall away? And what are those systems made of? What is it in my everyday life? Like just my going to the store and purchasing something, like how is consumerism tied up in this? I mean, and if you start to study some of the native cultures, I've been studying with a Cherokee elder, just kind of learning about how Cherokee culture existed prior to white man coming over. And it really changed everything, you know, and so just the whole way that society is set up. And I think that's a conversation, like we could spend the whole time on that. And maybe I'm going to write that down, and maybe we should have another conversation around that. I think how it relates to this is that a lot of ways that we harm each other, I think the fabric of those pains and those aggressions is wound up in this. It's wound up in the isms and in the how we sort of relate to each other's like worthiness or unworthiness or and yeah, again, it's like worth an hour of talking. Which so I would just say let's do talk about it, but maybe for now let's just put it on the shelf with the understanding that I'm perceiving the communal harms as stemming from those things, and that's why I brought it up.
Thank you. Gala has rejoined us, so she's going to go again.
Okay. Oh, I'm unmuted? So I did miss the beginning. Sorry, I think my internet is unstable, and I would love to hear the beginning of what Leslie was saying. So maybe later, Leslie, you can. I came in when you were talking about the consumerism and harm. I wanted to share that I was part of a really amazing retreat for youth workers last week. And it was led by a kind of an incredible group of young women called Rebellious Root. And they're starting this program where they're holding space for youth workers. And so I really wanted to participate. I was by double the oldest person there. So all the youth workers were half my age, and they're all not taking care of, but creating programming basically for migrant, undocumented, underserved populations in the boroughs, the New York boroughs. And I thought a lot about family camp this summer and the conversation that we were having about kind of youth having the space to rise up and lead. And I went away from camp just really with that question very open in my heart, because there was a little tension for me about, well, are they going to lead, or are we going to be a part of this? And I think there was a conversation with Marcel, one of the conversations we had after camp, and Tracy, I can't remember who was on that call, but you know, I mentioned, well, what about multi-generational? Like, what about a way where we're all feeling somehow a part of this? And I'm just putting this out there, kind of, I don't know what's right in this case, but in this group, what was so incredibly moving was, first it was youth led for youth, and the youth facilitators were incredibly experienced and grounded and soulful and amazing. And the most empowering thing about the whole weekend was how love was really the primary leading force of this. We were all there to be nourished and to share best practices and to see like modeling of different approaches that everyone's using to share. But it was so the inclusion, it was love and inclusion first. So no matter what the style or the need or the behavior of anybody in the room, and I was a minority as an older white woman there, it was so beautiful, and I was so inspired by their vision of using just love and inclusion as the dominant offering, and it allowed for conversations about difference, and we had a whole morning around boundaries where we explored boundaries together in this incredible exercise where we all moved into corners responding to different questions about boundaries. So we were kind of physically moving around and then able to share our feelings. And I guess I just wanted to share that there was not a moment where somehow well, in my experience, it felt like there wasn't a moment of othering or difference being held in a way that wasn't honored. And so it was the first time I'd had an experience that was felt very successful. And it wasn't Shambhala, which it was very much of like a grassroots activist community organization. And I just felt it made me think a lot about the idea of allowing youth to be leading, and how we I'd hold the space for that, but also to be a part of it. I guess I was there because I wanted to be a part of it. And I think that's, I don't want to be left out of the process of youth leading. I also want to be a piece of that. And even if it's just being there learning from them. So I guess the takeaway and my offering is the love and inclusion was very powerful. Yes. And last, I'd be happy to share a lot of the tools. I'm sure you all have many of them, but they are offering their programming as open, like as resource. So I'd love to share some of the things we did on the retreat. Mm-hmm. I'm complete.
Hi, I'm Laura. This is so heartwarming that this is happening. Sometimes I get asked by various centers in Shambhala how to start a children's program or about the curriculum in the program and what people should do and all that. And this is so beyond all of that it's so good to know. And I long for a way to tell people that you're on your own, you can do whatever you want. And but more than that, opening these really deep questions is what we need to do. So it's high time that we're all joining together in looking at these issues, all kinds of issues that our kids and our families are faced with these days. So, yeah. What about others? How would you like to contribute a further question or something heartfelt that you've experienced?
Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone else has felt this question or something close to this arise, either in a parenting moment or if you teach or lead programs. I wonder if anybody else is working with this, relationship, tight and loose, safety, sacredness.
Yeah, we're unmuted now. Okay. Hi. Hi. I'm Mia Coltrane, and Will and I are members of the Open Sky Shambhala in Eugene, Oregon. And we are collaborating to try to come up with a program for our very tiny center. And so that's one of our motivations in coming today. Um, and so it's very useful for me so far to hear some of the issues that have been arising. And in the past, I have done licensed childcare, and I think this whole idea of safety with background checks and boundaries and clarity is very important. And I'm glad that that's coming up as issues. We were wondering a little bit more about the whole idea of curriculum, and speaking with Laura, found out that there aren't standardized curriculums for within Shambhala for working with the youth. And so we will probably just come up with our own ideas. We have a very young population at this time, under 5. So who knows if that will expand, but that's why we're here. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and share a little bit. At the Denver Center, we have a wide range of youth that come and visit with us. And when I first started, we were like strongly in the 4 to 6-year-old range. And some of them have grown up. So now, we edge towards the 9 and 10-year-olds. But we now have a population of families who have just started. And so we're back down into infants and toddlers again. And I think really what I appreciated a lot from what Gala shared was this idea of inclusion. So as we do get this range of ages in youth who do come around and are in environments, is not isolating them so much from each other. There become moments and points where as our children are aging into the preteens and teens, they want some space of that. They're kind of tapped into leadership maybe too often, and they still want to remember what it's like to be a kid. And so they feel a little bit more comfortable doing that when they're not with the younger children, because they don't want to be judged as too childlike or whatever. But there is this desire to still touch in to that childlike quality. And so creating some sort of container where everyone can show up and just be, while still not just turning our older children into like instant leaders, right? Like they don't always just want to be charged with that care of our youngest children. So how do we navigate that boundary? And I think with the youngest ones, my biggest boundary has been if even in background checks and all of these things, is that we remember the family part of children's and families. And so if kids are younger than 4 and or they're not potty trained, that really like it's an invitation to be with the family as much as it is just to be with the children. And how can we make those spaces? So as much as we still want our in between age children's not to always be tapped to trying out their leadership skills, to still feel like children. How awesome is it to give some parents some opportunity to be like children? And so that really can be the underpinning of the space we provide, is that everyone gets to just kind of be free and explore and use curiosity and not really have a driving agenda or product that we have to produce. So how can we all touch into childlike wonder? So that's what I use in Denver as a frame.
Susan.
You hear me? Okay. Well, I just want to respond to you, Amy, just because I've got lots of little snippets, and I'll try to be coherent. But one thing that really delighted me this summer, I was at family camp at Carmicholing, and it was a simple thing, but the teens were acting as counselors for the younger children, but they actually had a counselor for themselves. And they worked in the morning and provided, their good service to their younger to the younger children. But then they had a group. There was a sense of honoring who they were and what their interests were. And family camp is so unique because there's time to do that. And so finding that balance of time that they give, but time that they get to be who they are and be together, because that's really what they want to be, is together, right? But they love being with the children too. I heard them talking about that, and they really they saw that as a piece of what they wanted that as well. But balancing it with, they worked with a particular counselor who actually, I think that's that place that Leslie, or that Gala was talking about, that place where there's leadership within the context of working with the teens, finding their leadership. They had someone who wasn't as old as a parent who was their counselor. There's that in between, and they know the difference. Boy, they know the minute you're too old. It's really funny. So I wanted to just say something about that. I have a question which I'm living with right now. I work at the Shambhala School in Halifax, and I've just organized a in-service day around implicit bias. And when you were talking, Leslie, when you introduced this, I mean, this happens to be a professor, African studies, social justice. She works in the social justice department at St. Mary's University, which was one of the big universities in Halifax. She's a Black queer woman, and she has worked. She went to. I mean, she's got a PhD. She's brilliant. Anyway, luckily, one of her children is in our school, and she's offering this workshop for the faculty. But when you were talking, Leslie, and you were talking about ageism and racism and classism and all the isms that we're influenced by, I was thinking about it. This is just my question, and maybe I'm going to expose myself as being really naive. But all of a sudden, I started thinking of the concept of implicit bias and how we all have those. We all have implicit bias, and it's not just race. It can be anything. So I just wonder about that as just a topic to hook on to your. You're right next to me in the frame. Hook on to that, So that's just a question that I'm living. It's a living question for me, and I really appreciate that you kind of started helping me think that it might somehow be connected with boundaries. And then the last thing, of course, I can't help myself, especially for the Eugene, Oregon people and anybody who's working in centers. I discovered this project called the Virtues Project. You can look it up online. I've become a real promoter of it only because I love it. I'm very passionate about it. You can look up the Virtues Project. It started in Canada in 1988, I think, 98 maybe, I don't remember. Not that long ago, but it has legs. It's worldwide, and it's a character development program. When I showed it to an acharya, he basically said, this is skillful means. This is how we can bring the language of basic goodness more into our relationships And that's what I taught this summer at the family camp at Carmacholing for the parents. And there are 5 strategies of the Virtues Project, and I'm going to name them and then I'm going to stop. And I'm happy to have people ask more questions, but I don't want to bore you. But the 5 strategies are: speak the language, teachable moments, setting clear boundaries, honoring the spirit, and the art of listening, or the art of companioning. And I think that all of these somehow are very connected to, setting clear boundaries is like, to me, it's the elephant in the room of Shambhala. And it comes down to the relationship we have with our own minds and our own practice, and how we discern, how we work with our minds. So I want to stop there and leave space, but that's my offering for now. Thank you.
We're almost, oh, Marcel, good. Okay.
So it's so interesting to hear everybody speak. I've been fascinated by little snippets from each one of you. And I'm curious about the relationship between the hierarchy, like it seems like we're sort of moving out of hierarchy into a much more horizontal exploration of leadership, how we co-lead or lead from the middle. And I'm just very interested in this question, and it's something that I've been examining in my professional life. So I work for the Compassionate Communication Center of Ohio, and we explored just shifting this relationship where each person takes responsibility for their own. We've looked into sociocracy, we've been looking at reinventing organizations, we've been looking at different models where each individual takes responsibility for their own contribution, and also makes it clear to the community what those commitments are, and then is held accountable by the community. And as I look at some of the situations that have evolved and some of the relationships that we're in with the younger generation in particular, when we look at family camp and the young leadership, which is both incredibly potent beyond kind of what I could ever have imagined doing myself when I was that young. And also, I mean, just in the world, when you look at sort of the youth leadership, it's really incredible. And how to make space for that, how we make space for the kind of ideas and time that it is now that we may or may not understand because of our age and perspectives. And then also, you know, how to be in relationship with one another where we create some sense of accountability, and we also feel like our voice is needed. And I think a lot of what these traditional models of leadership have done have created a centralization of power where one person is sort of responsible for saying, you know, you do this or you don't do that. And we're very familiar with how that feels, about how there is a right and a wrong way. But I really appreciate this introduction or exploration of what there is that's beyond that. So when we are, when we feel like our voice is needed, and I think that this is something beautiful that family camp does, is it basically trusts people. You know, you open your heart, you invite people, you see the capacity that's inherent, and you trust it. You allow it to emerge. But then there also needs to be this other element of awareness and commitment. And so, you know, if you trust someone, but then you abandoned their effort, there can be all kinds of chaos. So like in family camp, there's so much happening all the time in every aspect of the camp. And so the question seems to be, how do we become more deeply engaged in our relationship with one another? How do we understand what's needed? How are we holding our awareness, and how are we committed to co-creating what we're doing together? And so those are just some of the questions I'm holding. I don't know how relevant they are to the conversation, but I'm fascinated by what Gala was saying about love being at the very center of, you know, when you love someone and you and you trust them. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. I wasn't really planning to speak. I was just hoping to listen. But I was wondering if anybody wanted to talk a little bit more in this vein about non-hierarchical, like how we sit in a circle together and how we really explore trusting each other's wisdom and making it clear that each voice is needed. And I'm really wondering how, in particular, we hear these younger voices and how we empower them. So that's it for me.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. That's about time for this group discussion. And I just wanted to mirror back some of the things that I've heard come up while we've been talking. Balance, inclusion, love at the center, engaging in relationship, virtue, leadership, implicit bias, dismantling hierarchical systems. So all of this, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like we're all, it's not all like one topic, but we've been sort of dancing around and they're all related and they're all connected. And it already feels like there are plenty of topics to be drawn for future conversations just from what's arisen here today. So I invite you to continue to hold the questions, continue to reflect, and our intention for these calls, which will be monthly, are really to have a space to come together around our questions and around what it is that we're holding and relating to, and that we could hear from each other and support each other. And just like is happening today, that we could draw out, our collective wisdom. And yes, it's around families and children, but as we've heard today, it affects like every aspect of our lives and just how we exist as a human race. So it feels like a really powerful time in the world to be having those conversations. What's going to happen for the last 10 minutes of this call is that anybody who is interested in helping to plan the next topic's call, if you're interested in suggesting a topic, if you're interested in doing what I'm doing today and facilitating, if you're interested in doing what Amy's doing and being the call host, this is open. Anybody is welcome. If you know someone, who's not on today, who might be really great at holding a conversation around anything that's come up today or something else you're thinking of, please stay on the call and we'll spend 9 or 10 minutes doing that. But right now we'll do our official close to this conversation so that anyone who's not interested in the planning part can go ahead and bow out. And I do want to say before I go that we will have a call next month. And as of now, is it scheduled for the first Saturday?
That is what we are thinking is for Saturday, but a couple of conflicts have already been notified to us. So let's do another thumbs up vote. If first Saturday is what you want to keep it, if second Saturday might be better, or a different Saturday, or you'll just come when you can go sideways. Most people are just whenever Anna vote that it needs to be something different and one next. So we'll keep it open. What we might do is, as the topics come up and people are available to facilitate and host, like Leslie and I would, they might direct where the Saturday is. But we were hoping for consistency too. But seeing a lot of those sideways thumbs is, I'll get here when it happens. We might be able to be a little more flexible there.
So we'll keep you all posted. We're posting things in Facebook groups and email lists. So just look there. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your hearts and wisdom, and even those of you that didn't speak, I really still appreciated your presence being here. Let's close with a bow. Okay, bye to everyone who's signing off now.
Yay.
All right. So, Amy, you're muted. I saw your mouth moving. Okay.
Should we stop the recording?
Yes.